The screaming whine of the chainsaw ripped through the afternoon air like a banshee's wail, drowning out the peaceful sounds of the coastal Maine neighborhood. Nathan Wheeler slammed his truck door hard enough to rattle the windows, his jaw clenched tight as he stared at the destruction in his front yard. His knuckles were white where they gripped the steering wheel, and a vein pulsed visibly at his temple. 3 workers in hard hats and safety vests were systematically dismantling the massive oak tree, their oak tree, the one he and Celia had planted 17 years ago on their wedding day, with trembling hands and hearts full of hope. The ancient giant that had watched over their home through countless seasons now lay broken and bleeding sap across the manicured lawn, its century-old roots torn from the earth like exposed nerves, raw and violated. "What the hell, Celia?" Nathan's voice cut through the mechanical noise like a blade as he stormed across the driveway, his work boots crunching on scattered sawdust and wood chips. "We planted that tree on our wedding day. That was our promise tree." Celia emerged from the front door of their colonial-style home, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the late afternoon hour, designer sunglasses perched atop her head like a crown. She wore that dismissive expression he'd learned to hate over the past few years. The same look she gave the grocery store clerk when her credit card was declined. The same look she'd given him when he'd suggested they needed to talk about their marriage problems. She shrugged with the casual indifference of someone swatting away an annoying insect. "It blocked the view of the harbor," she said, already turning back toward the house, her voice carrying that tone of finality he'd grown accustomed to. Besides, it was getting too big. The roots were probably damaging the foundation. Nathan felt something snap inside his chest. Not the explosive rage he might have expected, but something colder, more calculating, something that made his vision sharpen and his breathing slow. That tree had been their promise to grow old together, to put down roots in this community, to build something lasting. They'd watered it together during the drought of their second year. He'd built Clara's tree swing on its lowest branch when she was 7. Now it was nothing but firewood, destroyed on a whim. "Ma'am?" One of the tree removal workers approached, a stocky man in his 50s with sawdust coating his red flannel shirt and work gloves. Sweat beaded on his weathered forehead despite the cool October air. He held a mud-caked metal box in his calloused hands, turning it over carefully, like it might contain something explosive. "Found this buried real deep in the root system, maybe 8 feet down. Looks like it's been there a hell of a long time. Figured you'd want to see it before we hauled everything away." Nathan took the box, feeling its surprising weight. The metal was corroded around the edges, but still intact, sealed with heavy-duty tape that had somehow survived years of freeze-thaw cycles and root pressure. The size of a large shoebox, it felt substantial, important. Celia had already disappeared inside the house, the screen door slamming behind her with enough force to rattle the frame. She hadn't even glanced at the box. "Any idea what it might be?" Nathan asked the worker. The man shrugged, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his glove. "Could be anything, really. Sometimes people bury time capsules, family papers, that sort of thing. Had a job last month where we found a coffee can full of old coins. Lady had no idea it was there." He paused, studying Nathan's face. "You okay, sir? You look like you've seen a ghost." Nathan realized he'd been staring at the box with an intensity that probably appeared unnatural. "Just surprised, I guess. Thanks for bringing it to me instead of tossing it with the debris." "No problem. We'll be finishing up here in another hour or so. Just need to grind down the stump and clean up the wood chips." Back in his garage, away from prying eyes and Celia's potential curiosity, Nathan set the box on his workbench and stared at it for a long moment. The garage smelled of motor oil and sawdust, familiar and comforting. Tools hung neatly on pegboard walls, and his motorcycle gleamed under the fluorescent lights. This was his space, the one place in the house where Celia rarely ventured. He pried open the box with a flathead screwdriver, the corroded metal giving way with a screech of protest. Inside, wrapped in multiple layers of plastic bags that had protected them from moisture and decay, were 3 items that would change everything he thought he knew about his life. A letter from Eastwood University's legal office, dated 17 years ago, printed on official letterhead and discussing a maltreatment claim settlement between a student and faculty member. The language was clinical and legal, but the implications were clear. Money had changed hands to avoid litigation. A copy of a $20,000 check made out to C. Wheeler from something called the Vayner Legal Settlement Fund. The check was dated 3 weeks before Clara's birth. The memo line reading "Personal Settlement, Confidential," and a photograph that made his blood turn to ice water and his hands shake so badly he nearly dropped it. Celia, visibly pregnant, maybe 6 months along, her belly round and prominent, standing in what looked like a professor's office. She was smiling, one hand resting on her swollen stomach, while a man's hand covered hers in an intimate, possessive gesture. Behind them, diplomas hung on wood-paneled walls, and a brass nameplate on the desk read, Professor Alan Vayner, Maritime Law Department. Nathan stared at the photo until his eyes burned and his vision blurred. Clara had been born exactly 3 months after this picture was taken. He knew because he'd been there, holding Celia's hand during 23 hours of labor, cutting the umbilical cord with trembling hands, crying with joy as he held his daughter for the first time. The timing was perfect. Too perfect. The timestamp on the photo showed it was taken in early February. Clara's birth certificate showed a May birth date, but the pregnancy in the photo looked far more advanced than the timeline would suggest if Nathan was the father. He ran the math again and again, but the numbers didn't lie. They never did. Nathan said nothing to Celia that evening when she asked about the box during dinner. He simply told her it was old garden tools and changed the subject to Clara's upcoming college applications. But everything inside him had changed. Every smile, every casual touch, every I love you now felt like a performance, a calculated deception. This wasn't over. This was just beginning. Nathan drove aimlessly through the winding coastal roads for 2 hours before pulling into the Seaside Motor Lodge, a rundown establishment on the outskirts of town where truckers and seasonal fishermen paid by the night. The neon sign flickered intermittently, casting pink and blue shadows across the cracked asphalt parking lot. The desk clerk, a thin man with yellowed teeth and suspicious eyes, barely looked up from his crossword puzzle as Nathan handed over $60 cash for room 12. "Checkout's at 11, the clerk said, sliding a key across the scarred counter. No smoking, no pets, no loud music after 10 p.m. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial disinfectant, with brown carpet that had seen better decades and furniture that belonged in a 1970s time capsule. Nathan didn't care. He needed somewhere private. Somewhere Celia would never think to look for him. Somewhere he could think clearly without her presence clouding his judgment. He spread the contents of the box across the scratched wooden table under the harsh fluorescent light. Under the unforgiving illumination, he read and reread every document, every detail burning itself into his memory like acid-etching glass. The university letter was clinical in its legal language. Inappropriate conduct between faculty and student, monetary settlement to avoid litigation, confidential agreement regarding disclosure. The words danced before his eyes as he tried to process their implications. Someone had paid to keep a secret. Someone had taken money to stay silent. The check was dated 3 weeks before Clara's birth. 3 weeks. In legal terms, that made it a payment for services rendered, not support for a future child. Hush money. The photograph was the most damning evidence of all. Nathan had taken thousands of pictures during Celia's pregnancy with Clara, documenting every month, every milestone, every doctor's appointment. In those photos, Celia had never looked as far along as she did in this image, not even in her 8th month. Nathan's phone buzzed with a text from Celia. "Where are you? Dinner's getting cold. Clara's asking for you." He stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "Headache. Need some air. Be home later." Another text arrived immediately. "Take some ibuprofen. I made your favorite pasta." Your favorite pasta. As if 17 years of marriage could be reduced to knowing his preferred dinner. As if kindness in small things could excuse betrayal in large ones. Flashbacks hit him like waves against a rocky shore. 17 years of subtle lies and weird timelines that had never quite made sense, but that he'd dismissed as pregnancy confusion or new mother stress. Celia's sudden decision to transfer from Eastwood University to the state college her senior year, claiming she wanted a fresh start. Her reluctance to talk about her time at Eastwood, always changing the subject when he asked about her professors or college friends, the way she'd insisted they get married quickly, before she was showing, she'd said, because she wanted to fit into her grandmother's wedding dress. Her mother Diane's nervous energy whenever anyone mentioned Clara's early arrival, always quick to change the subject or make excuses about premature babies being perfectly normal. The way Celia had insisted on handling all of Clara's medical records and pediatrician visits alone, claiming Nathan was too busy with work to take time off. All of it orchestrated, all of it carefully planned deception. Nathan pulled out his laptop and connected to the motel's spotty Wi-Fi. A Google search for Professor Alan Vayner, Eastwood University, yielded immediate results. Vayner still taught at Eastwood, now department head of maritime law. still married to the same woman for 25 years, with 3 children of his own. His faculty bio mentioned his specialty in coastal environmental policy and his published papers on maritime resource management, a distinguished career, unmarred by scandal. The university website showed Vayner's office hours, his recent publications, even his home address listed in the faculty directory. A man confident enough in his position to maintain complete transparency, or arrogant enough to believe his secrets were buried deep enough to never surface. By midnight, Nathan had a plan forming in his mind. It was methodical, patient, and absolutely ruthless. He'd built his construction business on attention to detail and careful planning. Those same skills would serve him well in demolishing the lies that had shaped his life. First, DNA test to confirm what his heart already knew, but his mind needed proven beyond doubt. Second, track down Professor Vayner and get the complete truth about his relationship with Celia. Third, uncover exactly how long Celia had been lying about everything else in their marriage. Fourth, document everything with the thoroughness of a criminal investigation. He researched phone monitoring software, reading reviews and comparing features like a man shopping for power tools. By 2 a.m., he downloaded an app called Family Guard and created a hidden cloud account under a fake name. The software was designed for parents monitoring their children's phone usage, but it would work just as well for monitoring a lying spouse. When he finally returned home at 3 a.m., Celia was asleep, her breathing deep and regular. She looked peaceful in the moonlight filtering through their bedroom curtains, almost innocent. Nathan felt a moment of doubt. Was he paranoid? Was there an innocent explanation for everything in that box? Then he remembered the photo, the intimate way the professor's hand had covered Celia's pregnant belly, and his resolve hardened like concrete setting in cold weather. He quietly synced Celia's phone to his monitoring system, installing invisible software that would copy every text message, call log, email, and GPS location to his private server. The installation took 15 minutes, and Celia never stirred. As he slipped into bed beside her, Celia stirred and rolled toward him, her hand finding his chest in the darkness. "You okay, baby?" she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. "You were gone so long. I was worried." Nathan covered her hand with his, feeling the wedding ring she'd worn while carrying another man's child. The metal felt cold against his skin, heavy with the weight of broken promises. "Just tired," Nathan said, staring at the ceiling where shadows from passing headlights moved like ghosts. "Long day." She pressed closer to him, her body warm and familiar against his side. "I'm sorry about the tree thing. I should have talked to you first. I know it was important to you." The admission hung in the air between them, an apology offered too late, with too little understanding of what had really been lost. "It's fine," Nathan said, the lie tasting bitter on his tongue. "What's done is done." But nothing was done. Everything was just beginning. The DNA test kit arrived 3 days later in a plain brown package that Nathan intercepted during his lunch break. He'd had it delivered to his construction office rather than risk Celia finding it at home. The kit was surprisingly simple: 2 cheek swabs, a prepaid envelope, and instructions that took less than 5 minutes to read. Nathan swabbed the inside of his cheek in his truck, sealed the sample according to the instructions, then drove home during Celia's Tuesday book club, the same book club where she'd supposedly been reading Tolstoy every Tuesday for the past 2 years, discussing themes of redemption and moral consequence with her sophisticated literary friends. Except Nathan's phone monitoring software told a different story entirely. The GPS data showed that Celia had spent her last 3 Tuesday evenings at the Harbor View Hotel, room 237, arriving at 6:30 p.m. and leaving around 10 p.m. The hotel charged premium rates for their harbor-facing suites, the kind of place where wealthy tourists stayed to watch the sunset over Casco Bay. Nathan used Clara's toothbrush for the second sample, feeling like a criminal as he scraped DNA from the bristles. His hands shook slightly as he sealed the evidence of his daughter's true parentage, evidence that might destroy the only pure relationship in his life. He mailed the samples from a post office 20 miles away, paying extra for expedited processing. Results in 5 to 7 business days. Meanwhile, the data streaming from Celia's phone painted a picture that made Nathan's stomach turn and his vision blur with rage. She wasn't just cheating now. She'd been systematically unfaithful for years. Multiple affairs, multiple lies, all hidden behind the facade of their perfect marriage and her role as devoted wife and mother. Troy Denham wasn't just her latest lover. He was a regional sales representative for Prestige Marine, a luxury boat dealership with clients up and down the New England coast. According to his LinkedIn profile, Troy was 34, divorced, with a 10-year-old son who lived with his ex-wife in Portland. His company bio described him as passionate about maritime excellence and committed to helping clients find their perfect vessel. Celia had been funneling money from their joint business account to help finance Troy's startup maritime consulting firm. The transactions were small enough to avoid triggering automatic bank alerts. $2,000 here, $3,500 there, always with innocuous memo lines like consulting fees or marketing expenses. But they added up. $23,000 over the past 8 months, transferred in carefully calculated amounts designed to avoid detection. Nathan printed everything, using his office printer during late hours when his employees had gone home. Hotel receipts showed charges for champagne, room service, and late checkout fees. Text messages between Celia and Troy revealed a relationship that had been going on for nearly 2 years, with conversations that made Nathan's skin crawl. Troy, can't wait to see you Tuesday. Booked our usual room. Celia, Nathan's working late again. Sometimes I think he loves that construction site more than me. Troy, his loss is my gain. Wear that blue dress I bought you. Celia, you spoil me. But what if someone sees us? Troy, this town's full of tourists. We're just another couple enjoying the view. Nathan created a digital folder labeled simply Truth and watched it grow larger each day as new evidence accumulated. GPS logs showing Celia's location during supposed work trips to Portland or Boston. Credit card charges at restaurants she'd never mentioned visiting. Phone calls to Troy lasting hours, always when Nathan was at work or traveling for business. How was book club? Nathan asked when Celia came home Tuesday evening, her hair perfectly styled and her makeup fresh, despite supposedly spending 3 hours discussing Russian literature with middle-aged housewives. Oh, you know how it is, Celia said, not meeting his eyes as she hung her coat in the front closet. Margaret gets so passionate about the themes of redemption in Anna Karenina. We lost track of time discussing whether Levin represents Tolstoy's ideal of moral awakening. Nathan nodded, thinking about the GPS data showing she'd spent those 3 hours at Troy's waterfront apartment, not in Margaret's living room. Redemption's important, he said, watching her face for any sign of guilt or recognition. People should face consequences for their choices. Something flickered in Celia's expression, a brief tightening around her eyes, a hesitation before she answered. But she recovered quickly, smiling with practiced warmth. Exactly. That's what makes it such a timeless story. The way Tolstoy shows that our past actions have consequences we can't escape, no matter how much we might want to. The irony was so perfect it took Nathan's breath away. Here was his lying, cheating wife discussing the importance of moral consequences while living a double life that would make a spy envious. As the days passed, the phone monitoring revealed that Troy wasn't Celia's only secret. She'd been conducting a sophisticated campaign of deception for years. Fake business trips that were actually romantic getaways to Boston and Burlington. Charity donations that were really payments to a private investigator she'd hired to look into. Nathan's own background and business finances, and regular money transfers to an account belonging to someone called C. Morrison. When Nathan traced that name through online records and social media, he discovered it was an account under Celia's maiden name, one she'd kept secret throughout their marriage. The account was held at a different bank entirely, with statements mailed to a P.O. box that Celia rented under her maiden name. The account currently held over $40,000, money she'd been systematically skimming from their joint finances for years. But the most damning evidence came from Celia's text message conversations with her mother, Diane. Fragments of conversations that revealed the conspiracy had been much deeper and more calculated than Nathan had imagined. Celia, he's asking questions about Clara's birth certificate again. Something about inconsistencies with her medical records. Diane, just stick to the story we agreed on. Premature babies are common, and doctors dating can be off by weeks. Celia, what if he finds out about the money? The settlement is public record if anyone knows where to look. Diane, he won't. I made sure that box was buried deep enough. It should have rotted away by now. Celia, you promised me you burned everything. Diane, I tried to, but I couldn't bring myself to destroy it completely. It felt too much like destroying evidence of Clara's real father. Celia, Clara's real father is Nathan. That's what we decided. Vayner was just a seed donor who paid for the privilege. Nathan read that exchange 5 times before the full implications hit him like a physical blow. Diane hadn't just known about the affair and the settlement money. She'd been an active participant in burying the evidence. She'd been protecting Celia's secret for 17 years, lying to Nathan's face at family dinners and birthday parties, watching him love and raise another man's child while knowing the truth. The level of betrayal was staggering. It wasn't just Celia who had deceived him. It was an entire conspiracy involving the woman he'd considered a second mother, the woman who'd walked Celia down the aisle when her own father was too drunk to attend the wedding. The DNA results arrived on a Thursday afternoon, delivered to Nathan's office by express courier. He opened the envelope in his truck in the parking lot, his hands surprisingly steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to learn. The laboratory's conclusion was clinical and absolute. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. Based on genetic analysis, Nathan Wheeler cannot be the biological father of Clara Wheeler. Nathan sat in the parking lot for 30 minutes, staring at the paper that confirmed his daughter wasn't his daughter. Cars came and went around him, people going about their normal lives, while his world collapsed and rebuilt itself in the space of a heartbeat. Clara wasn't his biological child, but she was still his daughter in every way that mattered. He'd been there for her first steps, her first words, her first day of school. He'd coached her softball team and helped her with algebra homework, and held her when she cried about boys who didn't appreciate her worth. Biology be damned. Celia could take away a lot of things, but she couldn't take away 17 years of being Clara's dad. Nathan started his truck and drove to Eastwood University. Professor Alan Vayner's office was located on the third floor of the Maritime Studies building, exactly as it appeared in the 17-year-old photograph. Same dark wood paneling, same built-in bookcases filled with legal texts and maritime law. Journals, same view of the campus quad through tall, multi-paned windows. The man himself had aged gracefully, silver threading through still thick dark hair, wearing a navy tweed jacket with leather elbow patches that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Nathan had called ahead that morning, introducing himself as a freelance journalist working on a story about maritime law and coastal development in Maine. Vayner had agreed to meet, probably expecting a puff piece for the university newsletter, or perhaps a chance to promote his latest academic paper. "Mr. Wheeler, please, have a seat," Vayner said, gesturing to one of two leather chairs positioned in front of his imposing oak desk. His office smelled of old books and expensive cologne, with diplomas and awards covering the walls like trophies. "You mentioned you're interested in my work on environmental legislation?" Nathan settled into the chair and set his phone on the desk between them, the voice recording app already running invisibly in the background. "Actually, Professor, I'm more interested in your personal history. Specifically, your relationship with a former student, Celia Morrison, now Celia Wheeler, when she was in your classes." Vayner's pleasant, professional expression froze like ice forming on a winter pond. His coffee mug paused, halfway to his lips, and Nathan could see the man's Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. His eyes flicked to the phone, then back to Nathan's face, calculating and wary. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Mr. Wheeler, but I think there may be some misunderstanding." "I'm not implying anything," Nathan interrupted, his voice calm and steady as he pulled out the photograph. "I'm stating facts. This is you 17 years ago with my wife when she was carrying your child." Nathan slid the photo across the polished desk surface. Vayner's face went white as he stared at the image, his hands beginning to tremble slightly as he set down his coffee mug with a rattle of ceramic against wood. "Oh," Vayner said quietly, the single word carrying the weight of years of carefully buried guilt. "Oh, God, I thought she told you years ago." "Told me what, exactly?" Vayner ran his hands through his silver hair, suddenly looking every one of his 58 years. "When the settlement was finalized, when the university agreed to the confidentiality arrangement, she assured me she was going to come clean with whoever she married. She said it was temporary just until she got her life sorted out." "The $20,000 settlement to keep quiet about the affair?" Vayner winced, as if Nathan had struck him. "It wasn't supposed to be like that. Not entirely. Yes, there was an inappropriate relationship. I won't deny that. But when she came to me and told me she was pregnant," he trailed off, staring at the photograph like it might burst into flames. "What happened when she told you?" "I panicked," Vayner admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was married, had my own young children to protect. My career, my reputation, everything was at stake. When Celia suggested the settlement arrangement, it seemed like the best solution for everyone involved." "Suggested? You mean she came up with the idea?" Vayner nodded miserably. "She did her research, found out about the university's discretionary fund for resolving sensitive matters. She presented me with a complete proposal. The amount, the confidentiality terms, even the legal language. It was quite sophisticated for a 21-year-old. Nathan felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just youthful indiscretion. This was calculated manipulation. And you agreed? What choice did I have? She made it clear that if I didn't cooperate, she'd go public with everything. The university would have terminated me. My wife would have left me. My children. Vayner's voice cracked. I was terrified. So you paid her $20,000. The university paid it, Vayner corrected quickly, from their legal settlement fund. I never paid her directly. It was all handled through the university's legal department. Nathan leaned forward in his chair, fixing Vayner with a steady stare. But the silence came anyway. She never told me about you or the money. No, Vayner said, his voice heavy with what might have been regret. When she contacted me a few months later to tell me she was marrying someone else, someone who would raise the child as his own, it seemed like the best possible outcome. The child would have a stable father, she'd have financial security, and I could pretend none of it ever happened. Pretend? Nathan's voice carried a dangerous edge. You pretended away your own daughter for 17 years? I tried to, Vayner said quietly. But it's not something you can really forget. There were times over the years when I wondered, when I thought about reaching out, trying to establish some kind of contact, but the agreement was clear, no contact, no acknowledgement. Nathan pulled out a small digital recorder and set it on the desk beside his phone. Professor, I need you to tell me everything. The complete truth about your relationship with Celia, about the pregnancy, about the settlement. I need details, dates, everything you can remember. Vayner stared at the recorder for a long moment, then looked up at Nathan with eyes full of something that might have been relief. Are you going to expose me? Destroy my career? That depends, Nathan said. Are you going to tell me the truth? For the next 45 minutes, Vayner talked. He described how Celia had been a student in his maritime environmental law seminar, how she'd started staying after class to ask questions, how casual conversations had evolved into coffee meetings and then into something more. He detailed how the relationship had progressed over several months, how Celia had seemed mature and sophisticated beyond her years, how they'd both convinced themselves it was a romance between equals rather than what it actually was. A professor, taking advantage of his position. When Celia discovered she was pregnant, Vayner explained, she'd given him an ultimatum, help her financially or face public exposure and professional ruin. She'd already researched the university's policies on faculty misconduct and identified the settlement fund as a potential source of money. She'd even consulted with a student legal aid attorney about her options. She was incredibly thorough, Vayner said, shaking his head with what might have been admiration. She had documentation of our relationship, witnesses who could testify about our meetings, even emails I'd sent her discussing personal matters. When she presented her case to me, it was airtight. So you agreed to pay her off? The university's legal department agreed, Vayner corrected again. They felt it was less expensive than a lawsuit and the associated publicity. $20,000 was actually a bargain compared to what a maltreatment case might cost in legal fees and settlement damages. Nathan turned off the recorder and pocketed both devices. Professor, I need you to understand something. This isn't over. I may need you to testify about these events in court. Vayner's face went pale again. Court? What kind of court? Divorce court. Possibly criminal court, depending on what else I discover about my wife's activities. As Nathan left Vayner's office, he felt a cold satisfaction settling in his chest. The professor's testimony corroborated everything the documents suggested and contradicted every lie Celia had built their marriage on. But more importantly, it painted a picture of calculated manipulation rather than youthful mistake. Celia hadn't been a naive student taken advantage of by a powerful professor. She'd been a shrewd operator who'd identified an opportunity and exploited it for maximum financial gain. But Nathan wasn't done digging. Back home, he expanded his investigation into their financial records, using his business skills and attention to detail to trace every dollar that had flowed through their joint accounts over 17 years of marriage. What he found made his earlier discoveries look like petty theft. Celia hadn't just been skimming money, she'd been systematically looting their joint assets for years. The $40,000 in her secret account was just the tip of the iceberg. She'd taken out a home equity loan against their house for $75,000 without his knowledge, forging his signature on documents she'd filed through a notary who was apparently either corrupt or spectacularly careless about. Verifying identity. She'd cashed in Nathan's retirement bonds early, paying substantial penalties but claiming they needed the money for Clara's college fund, money that had actually gone to finance Troy's business ventures and their romantic getaways. She'd even taken out a life insurance policy on Nathan without his knowledge, listing herself as the sole beneficiary. In total, Celia had stolen or diverted nearly $200,000 from their marriage over the past 5 years, using it to fund her affairs and secret life, while portraying herself as the thrifty wife who clipped coupons and watched their budget. Nathan's phone rang while he was reviewing bank statements in his home office. Clara's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, Dad," his daughter, not his biological daughter, but his daughter nonetheless, said. Her voice carried that slight tension he'd been hearing more often lately. "Mom's acting really weird tonight. She keeps asking if you've been going through her stuff, if you've seemed suspicious lately." Nathan felt his chest tighten. "What did you tell her?" "That you've been acting normal, maybe a little more quiet than usual, but nothing weird." Clara paused. "But Dad, have you been going through her stuff?" The question hung in the air between them. Nathan closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the lies he was now carrying, the knowledge that would soon tear their family apart. "We'll talk soon, sweetheart, I promise." "That's not really an answer, Dad." "I know, but it's the only one I can give you right now. Just trust me, okay? Everything I'm doing is to protect you." After hanging up, Nathan made another discovery that pushed him over the edge from calculated investigation into cold fury. Hidden in Celia's email, buried in a folder labeled Insurance Documents, was correspondence with a divorce attorney named Kenneth Rath, a man with a reputation for aggressive tactics and favorable settlements for cheating spouses. Celia had been planning to leave him for months, strategically positioning herself to take half their assets while keeping her thefts hidden. The emails detailed a plan to claim emotional abandonment, citing Nathan's long work hours and focus on his business as evidence of a failed marriage. She'd even consulted with a financial advisor about how to hide assets during divorce proceedings. But the final straw was a draft email to Troy, never sent but saved in her drafts folder with the subject line, "Freedom." "Nathan's getting suspicious about something, but I can't figure out what. He's been different lately, watching me, asking casual questions about my schedule. We need to speed up our timeline. Once the divorce is final and I get my settlement, we can disappear together. Maybe somewhere tropical where they don't ask too many questions about money. I've already transferred most of what we'll need to the offshore account. He'll never find it." Nathan printed the email and added it to his truth folder, which now contained over 300 pages of evidence. Offshore account. She'd moved their money offshore, probably to some Caribbean bank that specialized in helping wealthy Americans hide assets from ex-spouses and tax authorities. The woman he'd loved and trusted for 17 years wasn't just an adulterer and a thief. She was a criminal. And she'd been planning to frame him as a neglectful husband while she robbed him blind and disappeared with her lover. Nathan drove to the law office of Patricia Kellerman, the most ruthless divorce attorney in the state. Kellerman had built her reputation destroying unfaithful spouses in court, and her fees reflected her success rate. But after reviewing Nathan's evidence, she'd agreed to take his case pro bono, calling it the most clear-cut case of marital fraud she'd seen in 30 years of practice. "Mrs. Kellerman," Nathan said, spreading documents across her mahogany desk, "I need to file for divorce, and I need to make sure my wife doesn't see it coming until it's too late to hide any more assets or destroy any more evidence." Kellerman, a silver-haired woman in her 60s with hunter's eyes, smiled with genuine appreciation as she reviewed the evidence. "Mr. Wheeler, your wife has made a crucial mistake. She's documented her own crimes so thoroughly that she's essentially prosecuted herself. This isn't just a divorce case. This is a criminal fraud case with a divorce attached. How quickly can we move?" "Emergency filing tomorrow morning. Restraining orders on all accounts by noon. Asset freezes by end of business. She won't be able to access so much as a checking account by the time we're done." Nathan felt a cold satisfaction wash over him. "Do it." As he left Kellerman's office, Nathan's phone buzzed with a text from Celia. "Working late again? I made your favorite dinner. Clara and I are waiting for you." He stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "On my way home. One last dinner as a family. One last night of pretending everything was normal. Tomorrow, the war would begin." The process server found Celia at Troy's apartment Tuesday afternoon. The same Tuesday, she was supposed to be at her book club discussing moral consequences in Russian literature. Nathan watched from his truck across the street, parked in the shadow of a delivery van, as the young woman in the navy blazer knocked on the apartment door with official authority. Through the second-floor window of Troy's waterfront apartment, Nathan could see Celia answer the door in a silk robe that definitely hadn't come from their joint checking account. The process server handed her the thick manila envelope, had her sign a receipt, and walked away with business-like efficiency. Nathan watched Celia stare at the divorce petition for a full minute before her knees seemed to give out. She sank into a chair by the window, the papers scattered around her like fallen leaves. Even from across the street, Nathan could see her mouth moving, probably calling his phone, which he'd deliberately left in his truck's center console. Troy appeared in the window beside her, reading over her shoulder. Nathan had never seen the man in person before, only in social media photos and surveillance images. He was younger than Nathan had expected, probably late 30s, with the kind of artificial tan and carefully styled hair that spoke of vanity and insecurity. The kind of man who drove a leased BMW and wore designer jeans to appear more successful than he actually was. Through the window, Nathan watched Troy's face cycle through confusion, alarm, and what looked like calculation. When Troy started pacing and gesturing emphatically, Nathan knew the man was already planning his exit strategy. Guys like Troy didn't stick around when their sugar mama's money train got derailed. Nathan's phone buzzed with the first of what would be 17 missed calls from Celia over the next 3 hours. By the time Nathan arrived home that evening, having deliberately taken the long route through downtown and stopped for gas twice, Celia was pacing their living room like a caged hunter. Clara sat on the couch with her homework spread across the coffee table, but Nathan could tell she wasn't actually studying. Her eyes tracked her mother's movements with the nervous attention of someone watching a snake in a glass cage. Nathan. Celia spun toward him as he walked through the front door, the divorce papers clutched in her white-knuckled fist. "What the hell is this?" She waved the petition at him like evidence of his betrayal. Nathan hung up his jacket with deliberate calm, taking his time to smooth the wrinkles and check that his keys were in the pocket. "It's exactly what it looks like, Celia. I'm divorcing you." "But why? I don't understand." Her voice cracked with what sounded like genuine confusion. "We had some problems, sure, but every marriage has problems. We can work through this. We can go to counseling." Nathan looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment he saw the woman he'd fallen in love with 17 years ago. The college senior with dreams of environmental law and changing the world. The young woman who'd cried when he proposed on the harbor pier at sunset. The new mother who'd stayed up all night singing lullabies to a colicky baby. But then, he remembered the photographs, the bank records, the recorded conversations. The woman standing in front of him was a carefully constructed fiction, a performance that had lasted nearly 2 decades. "Clara," Nathan said, his voice gentle but firm, "I need you to sit down. Your mother and I need to tell you something important." Clara's textbook slipped from her lap as she looked up at him with worried eyes. "Dad, what's going on?" "Mom's been crying and making phone calls all afternoon." Before Nathan could answer, Diane's car pulled into the driveway with a screech of tires on asphalt. Nathan had called his mother-in-law an hour earlier, knowing she needed to be present for what came next. She deserved to face the consequences of her complicity, and Clara deserved to hear the truth from all the adults who had conspired to hide it. "Perfect timing," Nathan said, as Diane hurried through the front door, her face pale with anxiety and something that looked like resignation. "Nathan, what's going on?" Diane asked, though her eyes avoided his face. "Celia called me sobbing, saying you filed for divorce out of nowhere. She said you've lost your mind." Nathan walked to the mantel where he'd placed the metal box that morning. The same box that had started his journey down this rabbit hole of lies and betrayal. He set it on the coffee table in front of Clara with reverent care, like a priest placing a holy relic on an altar. "Sweetheart," Nathan said, sitting on the edge of the coffee table so he was at eye level with Clara, "I love you more than life itself. You are my daughter in every way that matters. But I need you to know something important, and I need you to hear it from me rather than discover it some other way." Clara's eyes were wide and frightened. "Dad, you're scaring me." Nathan opened the box and pulled out the photograph, holding it so only Clara could see it initially. "This was taken when your mother was pregnant with you. The man in this picture is Professor Alan Vayner from Eastwood University. According to the DNA test I had done, he's your biological father." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara stared at the photograph like it was written in a language she couldn't understand. Celia had gone completely still, her face cycling through shock, recognition, and something that looked like relief. Diane had sunk into Nathan's recliner like her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. "What?" Clara's voice was barely a whisper. Nathan gently took the photograph from her hands and showed it to Celia. "Care to explain this, Celia? Or should I let Diane tell us about her role in burying the evidence?" Celia stared at the photo, her face going through rapid changes of expression. Surprise, guilt, calculation, and finally a kind of defeated recognition. Where did this come from?" Nathan's smile was cold as Maine winter surf. "The box, Celia. The one that was buried under our wedding tree. The tree you had cut down without asking me." "What box?" Celia's confusion seemed genuine, which only made the revelation more satisfying. "I don't know anything about a box." Diane made a sound like a dying animal, a low moan that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. "Oh God! Oh no, no, no!" Nathan turned to his mother-in-law with carnivory focus. "Tell them, Diane. Tell them what you did 17 years ago." Diane's hands were shaking so badly she could barely form words. I buried it. I was supposed to destroy everything, but I couldn't. I thought maybe someday." "You what?" Celia's scream could probably be heard 3 houses away. "You were supposed to burn everything. Every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence. That was the plan." "I tried," Diane cried, tears streaming down her face. "I stood in my backyard with a metal trash can and lighter fluid ready to burn it all. But when I saw that photograph of you pregnant looking so happy, I couldn't destroy it completely. It was proof that Clara had a father, even if it wasn't Nathan." Clara stood up abruptly, the photograph falling to the floor like a discarded playing card. "So my whole life is a lie?" Before anyone could answer, she ran from the room. Nathan heard her feet pounding up the stairs, heard her bedroom door slam with enough force to rattle the windows. Celia turned on her mother like a hunter finally cornering its prey. "You ruined everything. 17 years of keeping this secret, and you sabotaged it from day one." "No, Celia," Diane said, her voice gaining strength as her tears continued to flow. "You ruined everything. I couldn't destroy the truth completely. Some part of me hoped you'd find the courage to do the right thing eventually." "The right thing?" Celia spun to face Nathan, her composure completely shattered. "You planned this. You orchestrated this whole thing. The tree, the divorce papers, having my mother here, it's all calculated." Nathan's calm never wavered, though inside he felt like a dam holding back an ocean of rage. "No, Celia, you planned this. 17 years ago, when you decided to build our marriage on lies. I just uncovered what you buried. You have no idea what it was like." Celia was screaming now, her carefully maintained facade cracking like ice in a spring thaw. "I was 21, pregnant and terrified. Vayner was my professor. He had all the power, and when I told him about the baby, he threatened to ruin my academic career if I didn't keep quiet about the relationship." Nathan pulled out his phone and queued up the recording of his conversation with Professor Vayner. "That's interesting, because he told me a different story." Vayner's voice filled the room through the phone's speaker, calm and professorial. "Miss Morrison, Mrs. Wheeler, initiated contact with me after discovering her pregnancy. She explicitly stated that she intended to marry her boyfriend and needed money to start her new life. The $20,000 was her suggestion, not mine." Celia's face went white as the professor's recorded voice continued, contradicting every word she'd just spoken and revealing her as the calculating manipulator she'd always been. "He lied," Celia protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "He's trying to protect himself. So you took his money and lied to me instead," Nathan said when the recording ended. "I was protecting us, protecting Clara. You were a good man, Nathan. And I knew you'd be a better father than Vayner ever could be." Celia's voice cracked with desperation. Nathan stood up and walked to his desk, pulling out a thick folder that had grown substantially over the past weeks. "Should I tell Clara about Troy Denham, about the money you've been stealing from our accounts? About your plans to disappear to somewhere tropical once you clean me out in the divorce?" Celia lunged at him, her manicured nails aimed at his face like claws. Nathan caught her wrists easily, his construction worker strength making her struggles look pathetic. "I also know about the offshore account," he said quietly, his grip firm but not painful. "About the home equity loan you took out with my forged signature. About the life insurance policy you bought on me without my knowledge." Celia went limp in his grip, her fight evaporating as she realized how completely she'd been caught. Her carefully constructed world was collapsing like a house of cards in a hurricane. "How long have you known?" she whispered. "Long enough to document everything," Nathan said, releasing her wrists. "Long enough to make sure you'll never be able to hurt anyone like this again." Diane was sobbing openly now, her hands covering her face. "I'm so sorry, Nathan. I'm so sorry for all of it." "Sorry doesn't give me back 17 years of my life," Nathan said. "And it doesn't give Clara back the father she deserved to know." Celia sank onto the couch, finally understanding that her lies had caught up with her. "What happens now?" Nathan looked toward the stairs where Clara had disappeared. "Now we tell our daughter the truth, all of it. And then we let the courts decide what justice looks like." The Cumberland County Courthouse was packed with observers when the Wheeler divorce proceedings began 3 weeks later. Word had leaked about the case. The wronged husband, the cheating wife, the secret child, and the buried evidence that exposed it all. Local news crews waited outside like hungry vultures, hoping to catch interviews with the key players in what the Portland Press-Herald had dubbed the buried truth case. Nathan's attorney, Patricia Kellerman, was a silver-haired shark who'd built her reputation destroying unfaithful spouses in divorce court. She'd taken Nathan's case pro bono after reviewing his evidence, calling it the most clear-cut case of marital fraud she'd seen in 30 years of practice. This morning, she wore a charcoal gray suit that projected authority and carried a briefcase that contained enough evidence to end Celia's life as she knew it. Celia's attorney, by contrast, was a nervous young man named Bradley Pierce, who'd barely been out of law school long enough to develop confidence in a courtroom. Pierce had inherited the case from his firm's senior partner, who'd mysteriously withdrawn from representing Celia after learning the scope of evidence against her. The senior partner had cited ethical concerns and conflicts of interest, leaving Pierce to handle what was clearly a career-defining disaster. Judge Margaret Harrison presided over the proceedings with the stern authority of someone who'd seen every possible variation of human betrayal and deception. She was a stern woman in her early 60s with steel gray hair and no patience for theatrics or time wasting. She'd read the preliminary filings over the weekend and ordered an expedited hearing, given the criminal implications of some of Celia's actions. The courtroom was divided like a wedding gone wrong. Nathan sat at the plaintiff's table with Clara beside him, while Celia sat alone at the defendant's table. Diane had been subpoenaed as a witness and sat in the gallery, looking like she'd aged 10 years in the past month. "Mrs. Kellerman," Judge Harrison said, adjusting her reading glasses, "please present your opening statement." Kellerman stood with theatrical grace, commanding the courtroom's attention like an experienced performer taking center stage. "Your Honor, this case represents one of the most systematic campaigns of deception and theft we've ever seen in a marriage dissolution proceeding. The defendant, Celia Wheeler, has spent 17 years building her life on a foundation of lies, criminal fraud, and emotional manipulation." She gestured to the evidence table, where Nathan's truth folder had grown to over 500 pages of documentation. Bank records, photographs, recorded conversations, and DNA test results were organized with military precision. "We will demonstrate that Mrs. Wheeler not only deceived her husband about the paternity of their child, but also engaged in sustained financial fraud, infidelity, and conspiracy to commit identity theft. The plaintiff, Nathan Wheeler, has been the sufferer of what can only be described as a long-term criminal enterprise disguised as a marriage." Pierce's opening statement was weak by comparison, focusing on Celia's youth when the affair occurred and her genuine love for Nathan despite her mistakes. He attempted to paint her as a sufferer of circumstance rather than a calculating manipulator, but Judge Harrison's expression remained skeptical throughout his presentation. The first witness was Professor Alan Vayner, who'd flown in from Boston specifically to testify. He looked uncomfortable in his Navy suit, like a man attending his own funeral. Under oath, he confirmed everything from Nathan's recording, adding details that further undermined Celia's version of events. "Professor Vayner," Kellerman asked, "please describe the circumstances under which you first became intimately involved with the defendant." Vayner shifted in his chair, his voice barely audible. "Miss Morrison, Mrs. Wheeler was a student in my maritime environmental law seminar. She began staying after class to discuss course material, but the conversations gradually became more personal. She seemed mature beyond her years, sophisticated in ways that made me forget the appropriate boundaries between faculty and student. Who initiated the physical relationship? She did. She invited me for coffee off campus, ostensibly to discuss her senior thesis. When we returned to my office to review some research materials, she She made her intentions clear. Kellerman walked him through the timeline of their affair, the pregnancy revelation, and Celia's demands for financial compensation. Vayner's testimony painted a picture of systematic manipulation rather than professorial predation. When Miss Morrison informed you of her pregnancy, what was her attitude? Businesslike, Vayner said without hesitation. She had clearly thought through the situation thoroughly. She presented me with options. I could acknowledge paternity and face the professional consequences, or I could agree to a financial settlement that would allow her to start fresh with someone else. Did she ever indicate she'd been coerced into the relationship? No. In fact, she was quite clear that the relationship had been consensual and that she was using the pregnancy as leverage for financial support. She even had legal advice about how to structure the settlement to avoid tax implications. Pierce's cross-examination was painful to watch. Vayner easily deflected every attempt to paint him as the carnivory professor, sticking to his story that Celia had been the aggressor in both the affair and the subsequent financial arrangements. Nathan testified next, walking the court through his discovery process with methodical precision. He presented the phone, monitoring evidence, the financial records, and the forged documents like a crime scene investigator laying out evidence for a jury. Mr. Wheeler, Kellerman asked, when you discovered your wife's infidelity and theft, why didn't you confront her directly? I wanted to understand the full scope of her deception before taking action, Nathan said, his voice steady despite the emotional weight of his testimony. I suspected that if I confronted her too early, evidence would disappear and she would find new ways to continue her crimes. How did that decision affect you emotionally? Nathan was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Living with someone who'd been lying to me for 17 years, pretending everything was normal while I documented her crimes. It nearly broke me. But I knew that Clara, my daughter, regardless of biology, deserved to know the truth. And I knew that Celia's sufferers deserved justice. Sufferers plural, Mr. Wheeler? Myself, Clara, my mother-in-law who was pressured into participating in the cover-up, and Troy Denham, who was being used for his money just like Professor Vayner was used for his. The most devastating testimony came from Diane, Celia's own mother. Under subpoena, she had no choice but to reveal the full extent of the conspiracy that had shaped 17 years of lies. Mrs. Morrison, Kellerman said, please tell the court about your role in concealing evidence of your daughter's affair and the resulting pregnancy. Diane was barely holding herself together, her voice shaking as she spoke. I helped my daughter bury that box because I was afraid of scandal, afraid of judgment, afraid of losing our place in the community. But I never destroyed it because I prayed that someday Celia would find the courage to tell the truth. Were you aware of the financial settlement your daughter received from Professor Vayner? Yes, she showed me the check, told me it was for Clara's future. I wanted to believe it was the right thing to do. Did you know about your daughter's ongoing infidelity during her marriage to Mr. Wheeler? Pierce objected, but Judge Harrison overruled him. I suspected, Diane admitted, tears streaming down her face. There were signs, unexplained absences, new clothes and jewelry she couldn't afford on their family budget, the way she talked about Nathan with increasing resentment. But I chose to believe her lies because it was easier than facing the truth about what kind of person I'd raised. The financial evidence was overwhelming. Kellerman presented bank records, forged documents, and Troy Denham's business records, showing the flow of stolen money like water through a broken dam. Troy himself had been subpoenaed, but had fled the state rather than testify, which Judge Harrison noted for the record as potential witness tampering. Mrs. Wheeler, Kellerman said during her cross-examination of Celia, you stole nearly $200,000 from your husband over the course of your marriage. How do you justify that? Celia sat ramrod straight in the witness chair, her defiance finally surfacing after days of looking defeated. I didn't steal anything. That money was from our joint accounts. I had every right to use it for our family's future. For your affairs? For your lover's business ventures? For a secret offshore account your husband didn't know existed? I was planning for our future. Celia's voice rose to nearly a shout. Whose future, Mrs. Wheeler? Yours and Mr. Denham's? Because we have your emails discussing your plans to disappear somewhere tropical after taking half your husband's assets in the divorce. Judge Harrison gavelled for order as murmurs rippled through the gallery. Celia's composure finally cracked completely. You don't understand. I was trapped. I made one mistake 17 years ago and it spiraled out of control. I couldn't tell Nathan the truth because it would have destroyed everything we'd built. So instead, you decided to destroy him. That's not what I meant to do. But that's what you did, isn't it? You built your entire marriage on fraud, theft, and lies. You let your husband raise another man's child while you systematically robbed him blind. And when you got bored with him, you planned to abandon him and take everything he'd worked for. Celia broke down completely, sobbing into her hands while Pierce tried futilely to object to Kellerman's characterization. But the damage was done. Celia had admitted to everything on the record. The final witness was Clara, now 18 and legally able to speak for herself. Nathan had tried to spare her from testifying, but she'd insisted on having her say. Clara took the witness stand with quiet dignity, wearing a simple black dress and carrying herself with poise that belied her age. When she spoke, her voice was clear and steady. "I love the man I've called my father for my entire life," Clara said, looking directly at Nathan. "Biology doesn't change the fact that he's been there for every scraped knee, every school play, every moment that mattered. What my mother did was unforgivable, but it doesn't change who my real father is." Pierce tried to get Clara to express sympathy for Celia's situation, but Clara refused to be manipulated. "My mother lied to me every day of my life," Clara said simply. "She let me believe in a version of my family that never existed. That's not love, that's selfishness." Judge Harrison's verdict was swift and comprehensive. She awarded Nathan full custody of Clara despite the lack of biological relationship, citing the girl's expressed wishes and Nathan's role as her psychological father. She granted him the house, the business, and the majority of their joint assets. She ordered Celia to pay full restitution for the stolen money, plus damages and attorney fees, but the judge went further than anyone expected. "Mrs. Wheeler," Judge Harrison said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "your actions constitute criminal fraud on multiple levels. I'm referring this case to the district attorney's office for prosecution. You will surrender your passport immediately and remain in the jurisdiction pending criminal charges." Celia's face went white as the court officer approached to collect her travel documents. "Your Honor, please. You forged legal documents, committed identity theft, and engaged in a pattern of criminal behavior spanning nearly 2 decades, Judge Harrison continued. "The court has no sympathy for your situation, as it was entirely of your own making." As the judge's gavel fell, ending the proceeding, Nathan felt a profound sense of completion. Justice had been served with mathematical precision. Outside the courthouse, Nathan faced a wall of reporters and cameras. He kept his statement brief, Clara standing beside him with quiet dignity. "Justice was served today," Nathan said to the assembled media. "My daughter and I can finally move forward with our lives, knowing the truth is out in the open." "What's next for you and Clara?" a reporter asked. Nathan looked back at the courthouse, where Celia was being led away in handcuffs as her fraud charges were formally filed. Troy Denham would be arrested within the week on charges related to receiving stolen property and conspiracy to defraud. "We're going home," Nathan said, putting his arm around Clara's shoulders. "We're going to plant a new tree." 3 months later, Celia appeared at the front door of the house that used to be hers, looking like a ghost of her former self. Nathan barely recognized the woman who'd once commanded every room she entered. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a thrift store outfit that hung loosely on her diminished frame. Her hair was unkempt, her face gaunt, and her eyes carried the hollow look of someone who'd lost everything that mattered to her. The criminal trial had lasted 2 weeks, ending with Celia pleading guilty to multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. Her public defender had negotiated the best deal possible under the circumstances. 3 years in state prison, eligible for parole in 18 months. The local media had covered every detail, turning Celia into a cautionary tale about greed and deception. "Nathan," she said through the screen door, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, I just need to talk to Clara. Just for 5 minutes." Nathan handed her a manila envelope through the door without opening it. "Court order. Restraining order. Stay at least 500 yards away from this property, from Clara, and from me. You can't keep me from my daughter forever." "Clara's 18 now," Nathan said, his voice carrying no emotion whatsoever. "She can make her own decisions about contact. So far, she's chosen not to see you." Celia stared at the envelope with shaking hands. "I know I made mistakes, but..." "Mistakes?" Nathan's voice was eerily calm, with an undertone that could freeze blood. "You built our entire marriage on fraud. You stole our money to fund your affairs. You let me believe Clara was my daughter while you knew the truth. Those aren't mistakes, Celia. That's who you are. Through the window, Nathan could see Clara in the living room reading a book for her college literature course. She'd been accepted to the University of Maine with a full academic scholarship, her future bright despite the chaos of the past year. She'd heard her mother's voice but hadn't looked up from her reading. "She won't even see me," Celia whispered, her voice breaking. "Can you blame her? You didn't just lie to me, Celia. You lied to her every day of her life." She's the real sufferer in all of this. Nathan started to close the door, then paused as a thought occurred to him. Troy left town, by the way. Took what was left of his business and disappeared the day after your arrest. Apparently, dating a convicted felon wasn't part of his long-term plans. Celia's face crumpled like paper in a fire. Nathan felt nothing as he watched her break down completely on his doorstep. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, her shoulders shaking with the force of her grief. "I'm so sorry for everything." "I know you are," Nathan said, his voice carrying the weight of finality. "But sorry doesn't fix what you broke. And sorry doesn't give me back 17 years of my life." He closed the door and locked it, watching through the window as Celia stumbled back to her car, a 15-year-old sedan that barely ran, all she could afford after the restitution payments, and legal fees had taken everything she'd once owned. Clara looked up from her book as Nathan walked back into the living room. "Was that her?" "Yeah, I heard everything." Clara closed her book and looked at him with serious eyes that reminded him of the little girl who used to ask him to check for monsters under her bed. "You know you're still my dad, right? Biology doesn't change that." Nathan sat down beside her on the couch, the same couch where he'd revealed the truth about her parentage 6 months earlier. "I know," he said. "But I also know you have the right to contact your biological father if you want to. Professor Vayner has reached out through his attorney several times. He'd like to meet you if you're interested." Clara considered this for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe someday. But right now, I have the only father I need." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over Casco Bay through the window where the oak tree used to block the view. In the backyard, a new sapling grew in rich soil, a maple tree they'd planted together the day after the divorce was finalized. This tree would grow straight and true, rooted in honesty instead of lies. And when the time came, maybe Clara would plant a tree with her own family, knowing that some promises were worth keeping and some truths were worth waiting for. Nathan's phone buzzed with a text from his attorney. "Appeals court upheld the restitution order. Celia's offshore accounts have been frozen and will be returned to you. The Criminal Restitution Fund has approved an additional payment for emotional damages. It's finally over." Nathan read the message twice, then deleted it without showing it to Clara. She'd find out eventually, but tonight was about moving forward, not looking back at the wreckage of what used to be.